Hey, wanna play some fighting games? Fight! Holy shit. Okay. Mom, Dad, I need to talk to you about something. It's something rather important.
You've got your first pentakill in League of Legends?
No, and I've already done that years ago. And it was in Dota, not League.
Oh, son, don't tell me you're going pro in Call of Duty.
No. It's about games that you never knew that I played.
Oh no, don't tell me you've been playing mobile games?
Dear God, no, I'm not a war criminal.
Then what's all this suspense for?
Well, I'm a gamer of many kinds. Across the years, I've played MOBAs, first-person shooters, real-time strategy, role-playing games, simulation, open world, survival, crafting, horror, roguelites, VR even. But I'm not gonna sugarcoat this. Mom, Dad, I think I'm a fighting game player.
We know.
What?
Sorry.
Yo. When someone says they're not a fighting game player, that usually means they don't play fighting games. This hypothetical someone maybe could have, might have, would have probably played one or two or a few fighting games. But this hypothetical someone probably only plays them because their drunk friend wanted to fight them one-on-one during a house party, because they swear their perfect parries are better when they're drunk or something. This hypothetical someone wouldn't really be called a fighting game player, more of a casual player. For a long time, I considered myself a casual fighting game player. I've played them before, quite a bit in fact, but I never took them seriously. They were always fun, but I thought to myself I never really went out of my way to play them. Most of my competitive online games were Dota 2, Counter-Strike, Team Fortress.
The heavy's dead. The heavy is dead. Correct.
And just in case if there's any confusion, when I say fighting game, I mean the genre where you, mostly, fight one-on-one, you and an opponent. This ain't no Call of Duty. You both got a health bar, and you win by beating the shit out of your enemy with martial arts, swords, guns, magic, or whatever bullshit your character can do, till one of your health bar hits 0. Fighting games are pretty easy to spot. Just through the placement of the camera alone, you can already tell that, yeah, that's a fighting game. With some exceptions. It wasn't until I played Tekken 7 about 2 years ago, and more recently Tekken 8 and Street Fighter 6, that my love for fighting games started to blossom, or should I say, re-blossom again. Is that a word? Fighting games can offer an adrenaline-pumping experience far quicker and more efficiently than any other game genre. The thrill of fighting an opponent near equal or of greater skill, learning how to better yourself in the game, optimizing combos and movement, using everything you can to your advantage. It's a rush that few games can match. A while ago I made a short review of Tekken 8 when it released, and in it I stated that I never really played fighting games that much. Tekken Tekken 8 is finally here, the final piece of the fighting game renaissance. But I don't care. I don't really play other fighting games. I only really play Tekken because Tekken 3 was too damn good, and nostalgia is a hell of a drug. And at least during my time of Steam and online gaming, that is true. But my time playing online doesn't encapsulate my history of games. It wasn't until I looked back at my childhood games that I realized that I was a lot more familiar with fighting games than I previously thought. It's no wonder that my passion for fighting games was so easy to reignite. So, with some help from my brother, I tried to dig for some of my old fighting games. And after compiling everything that I can remember, I made this infographic here. It separates the game by era and roughly how much time I think I spent with each game. Most of these are rough approximations, especially the early half. Kinda hard for 7-year-old me to remember exactly how many hours I spent playing Beyblade Let It Rip. There might be a few that I missed. More or less every fighting game I've ever played is on here. Now that's a lot of fighting games, or at least I think so. I don't have access to my old consoles, so most of the footage here I'll have to source from other people. I'll make sure to credit each and every single one. I literally could have not made this video without them. I'll be putting their names in the video and in the description. As other games and genres came and went, my interests for fighting games went away, but never completely. When somebody says that they don't consider themselves a fighting game player, but they've played this many fighting games, makes you think. So, Internet Wanderer, if you'll allow me, let's trace my history with the genre, the games I played and how these games affected me growing up and even now. Among the games that I regularly play, is this just a passing fad for me? Or are fighting games here to stay? And you can help me come to the conclusion, was I a fighting game player all along? I have a confession. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I didn't exit the womb with a controller in my hand. I was not born a gamer, a travesty, no. Rather, I was molded into one. A gamer, not a travesty. When I was a young kid, I was barely playing games at the time. I was doing normal kid things like playing outside, not eating my vegetables, licking doorknobs or something like that. But that all changed when one day my uncle showed me a computer game that he was playing, Mech Warrior 4. It was a mech simulation game. All I remember was the lights, the explosions, the action. And ever since then, I knew it was the Zoomer dopamine life for me. But we didn't really have consoles that were up to date at the time. My early childhood was in the early 2000s, and my household didn't have a PlayStation 1 at least until like 2004, 2005-ish. So prior to that, we probably had like an Atari or some super early Nintendo console. I'm not entirely sure. I do know that the games we played on there were like Mario Bros, Battle City, Excitebike. I remember those were good. But the two fighting games that I can remember from that time were Yei-Ar Kung Fu and Urban Champion. Now, those games were great for their time, but I was a dumb toddler who could barely comprehend the world, and these two games didn't really spark any interest in fighting games in me at the time. I guess I liked the sound effects. It's kind of funny, I suppose. I guess I had to settle for playing outside and eating more doorknobs. But it wasn't until my parents got a PlayStation 1 that my gaming horizons finally widened.
Yes, friends, I'm talking about this. It may look like a harmless bagel toaster, but inside is a deadly donut.
Yes, we're behind when it comes to consoles, okay? My family finally upgraded to a PlayStation 1, a previous gen console at the time. Sometime in 2003, 2004, give or take. I remember when they bought it, they had a ton of burned CDs for the games. God forbid them actually pay full price for some of these games. Nah. Burned CDs all the way for us, man. So we went from an ancient console with about a dozen or so games to a relatively new console with some like 60 plus games. Starved for choice, I was not. And the very first PlayStation 1 game I ever booted up was
survivalist, heroic as a tiger is. Earn my stripes cause you know I'm do or die with this. Journey started young, super hard-headed. Call me crazy, but you is not my psychiatrist. Been through a lifetime.
Yeah, I know, it's a bit weird. Wu-Tang Clan Shaolin style. Not exactly the first game that I expected to play. Well, the reason it is the first game that I played is because in the CD case that my parents kept all the PlayStation 1 games, it was the first one on the first page. And being the stupid child that I was, I just thought I should go in order. So I picked this one. I remember being so impressed with the CG intro cutscene, and then being freaked out by the in-game level selector being this like dark alley. This was scary for a kid. I remember always choosing the first dude, Rizza, because he had 2 swords and he was in the intro cutscene. Nah, I'm just joking with you. It was probably because I had no idea how to select a character and I accidentally pressed X and, well, he was the first character on the roster. Overall, we didn't really play this game that much, despite it being the first PlayStation 1 game I've ever played. I mean, given the fact that this was my first experience with the PlayStation 1, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know what any of these buttons meant. And it didn't help that the game, with benefit of hindsight, was kinda janky. The in-game art style was a bit too busy and sometimes it was just a little difficult to tell what the hell was going on. Seriously, what's happening here? Now, time for some hard-hitting statistics. The vast majority of fighting games are 2D, meaning you can move forward, back, crouch, and jump. Wu-Tang Clan Shaolin style, and another game series I'm gonna cover later, are 3D fighters, meaning you can move in the third dimension, technically speaking allowing for more complex game mechanics and movement. I remember liking the whirlwind slash that Rizza could do. Apparently it had an uncensored version that you could access when you boot up the game by inputting a special code. Of course, I had no idea what that meant. It also had this cool special controller, which apparently you could have gotten back in the day. Looks pretty cool. Nonetheless, I will remember this game as my first of many. It was my first 3D fighting game. It was my first PlayStation game. It was my first 3D PlayStation game. And you want to know the funniest thing that this game taught me? It's the fact that this game taught me that the Wu-Tang Clan was in fact a real-life rap group. Now, I distinctly remember this as my first PlayStation 1 game. And it just so happens that I also remember exactly what the second PlayStation 1 game I've ever played. And that was...
Gundam, the Battle Master 2.
Now, I might have had a vague idea on what Gundams were at the time, but ultimately that didn't matter to me, as I was still obsessed with MechWarrior, and my dumb child brain thought of it like this: MechWarrior equals robots. Gundam equals robots. Therefore, Gundam equals MechWarrior. If my child self told me that now, I'd drop kick him myself. They are not the same, don't at me. Robots and mecha are another genre that I'm needlessly addicted to, but that's a story for another time. Regardless, Gundam Battle Master 2 was a 2D fighting game, and I remember liking it far more than Wu-Tang Clan. Its visuals were cleaner and the gameplay was a lot easier to understand. I usually picked the big green Gundam, Q-Mantha, or the one with the big shield, of which I actually have a figure of. I actually have several Gundam figures, despite me not being that big of a fan of the series overall. And while this game was easier than Wu-Tang Clan, I still had no idea what the controls were outside of the basic punches and kicks. I also owned the Japanese version, so I have no idea what was being said here.
私について一体何言ってんだ、このクソ野郎。知っておいてもらいたいのですが、私はネイビーシールズを首席で卒業しており、アルカイダに対する数多くの秘密襲撃に参加し。
Ultimately, none of that matters. Big robots smashing each other like Wall-E, that's all I need to know. I definitely had more fun here, and I was on a high on my newfound console at the time. It's a bit telling that my first 2 PlayStation 1 games were fighting games. But from here, I don't remember what my third game was anymore. I'm pretty sure it wasn't a fighting game at that point. We're not going in order anymore. So, these next fighting games, while still on the PlayStation 1, I'll just cover them in terms of how significant the game was to me. And now, time for a lightning round. I'll rush through these next few games as they didn't leave that big of an impact on me as the other games. But nonetheless, they're still good in their own right, and I want to talk about them, even if briefly. Battle Arena Toshinden 2. The Russian lady in the opening cutscene made me feel things. I always thought the graphics were kinda ugly, even for the PlayStation 1. But that makes sense given that the first game was one of the first games ever released on the system. I liked that characters had different weapons and made them unique. I always used the big sword guy, Duke. And knocking off opponents off the edge of the arena, hilarious. Comedy gold. Dragon Ball GT Final Bout. Hot take, I don't really care that much about Dragon Ball. I've got nothing against it, but I just never got into it, even back when I was a kid. The only character I really knew was Goku, and I had no idea who these other goobers were. The visuals were kind of bland and fugly, but that's probably just because it was a tie-in game if I had to guess, and I mostly just button mashed when I played it. Now I think about it, the only reason I had this game was probably because if I had friends over and they wanted to play something, I'd make them play this. Beyblade Let It Rip. Is this even a fighting game? I guess it is. I don't remember anything about it. All I remember is the announcer being loud as hell, kinda like me. Digimon Rumble Arena. This wasn't my first introduction to Digimon. However, it'll be more or less the last time I interact with the franchise, until I bought this figure about a year ago, because it reminded me of this game. The roster was really freaking cool. There was a lot to choose from, and I really liked the Digivolution concept. It changed up the gameplay of every character that you played. Every character is basically a 2-in-1. The music was also really good. Destrega. It was a cool arena projectile fighting game. I liked combining the spells that your characters could shoot, choosing if your spells would prioritize power, speed, or AoE. You could even do a combination if you wanted to. I always picked the Knight Dude with 2 swords. Are you noticing a pattern here? It had a good concept and gameplay. The visuals were pretty good too. It's a shame the series never took off. I also need to stress that I played many other games and genres on the PlayStation 1. Spyro, Omega Boost, Silent Hill, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Spider-Man 1 and 2, the Crash Bandicoot trilogy, Steel Reign, Resident Evil, Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver, Ace Combat 3 Electrosphere, Dragon Valor, Shadow Gunner, Armored Core, Legend, Mega Man Legends, Need for Speed 2, Scars, Killer Loop, Tail Consorto, Toy Story 2, Buzz Lightyear to the Rescue, Pepsi Man. I have fond memories of all these games. I just felt like I really needed to hammer home the fact that fighting games weren't the only games I played. And speaking of things we totally weren't talking about, superheroes.
Excuse me, I'm Eric Lensher.
Tails Xavier.
Go f*** yourself.
Around the early to mid 2000s, the X-Men movies were at the peak of their popularity.
What do they call you? Wheels?
So it's no wonder that my parents picked out some X-Men games for us. Case in point, X-Men Mutant Academy 1 and 2. I'll cover them as one. They're basically the same game, 2 just has more characters in it. It's a 2D fighting game where you control various mutants from the X-Men comics. They also have their basic attacks and you can use their abilities. Also, this is where my obsession with Cyclops began.
To me, my X-Men.
I'm severely annoyed that all of his major film appearances, he has not been done justice. Thank God for X-Men 97. Watch my shorts, by the way. You wanna take a wild guess on what character I played in these games? It's actually something you wouldn't expect. It's Professor X, in a wheelchair.
Very disappointing.
Anyway, these games are probably the reason that the X-Men are my favorite superhero group. I remember fighting my dad, who would always pick Gambit and then proceed to kick my ass. Come on, couldn't you have at least made me win at least once? This was also my first time being exposed to spamming, because my brother would just spam triangle, and Wolverine would just do this stupid attack. I also remember this specific franchise being the first time I actually bothered learning the tutorial and using the practice mode, because none of the buttons actually activated Cyclops' optic beams. You have to do some weird quarter circle forward gesture to activate the beams. So in a way, the thing that pushed child me to get good and actually learn how to play a game was just the want to shoot laser beams out of my character's eyes. And now, almost 20 years later, here I am in practice mode in Tekken 8, getting blue sparks for Dragunov and landing electrics with Kazuya. Feels goddamn good, holy shit. These games were great. They made me learn a lot about X-Men characters that I've never seen before. I've never heard of Havoc before this. I didn't know who the hell that was. And then the Fox movies proceeded to shit on my boy Cyclops. God damn it, why? Seriously, watch X-Men 97. But learning about all these X-Men characters made me think superheroes are actually kind of cool. Like I said earlier, I did play the Spider-Man PlayStation 1 games, and he's actually a guest character in here. If only there was a fighting game around this time that had superheroes as playable characters. Oh shit, a transition slide! Now, these next games that I'm going to cover has overlap between the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2. So before I talk about them, I gotta talk about this black brick. It was a timely upgrade in 2008. I guess my parents must have confused the PlayStation 3 for the PlayStation 2, but you know, counting is hard. I also got a PlayStation Portable a few years later. Nonetheless, a welcome step up from this old boy. It was also around this time that I started to diversify my games, even more so than I had before. My family just got a rather modern PC at the time, and I started playing RTSs, PC RPGs, and first-person shooters, with Medal of Honor Vanguard being the first PlayStation 2 game I ever played. The graphical and performance upgrade was amazing. Other memorable games from this era were Rogue Trooper, Resident Evil 4, Call of Duty 3, Tony Hawk Project 8, GTA San Andreas, God of War 2, Heat Seeker, Max Payne 2, Transformers, Test Drive, Castlevania, Curse of Darkness, Spartan, Total Warrior, Ghost Rider, Mafia, Robotech Invasion, Empire Earth, Neverwinter, Sacred, StarCraft, Warcraft 3, Siphon Filter, Logan Shadow, Star Wars Battlefront 2, Dead to Rights Reckoning, Burnout Legends, SOCOM Navy SEALs Fighting Bravo 2, Killzone Liberation, Katamari Damacy, Rayman Raving Rabbids. I was playing a lot more games this time. Nevertheless, I still played a lot of fighting games, albeit with less frequency. I don't have anything funny or witty to say to transition to my next topic, so here's a frog jumping off a bridge.
Finish him.
History lesson time. Back in the 1950s, Japan made a bunch of Godzilla kaiju movies to represent the zeitgeist of nuclear fear at the time. An understandable fear, given that a few years ago, 2 of their cities was made hotter than the sun for a few seconds. Kaiju, literally meaning strange beast, but we associate it with giant monsters destroying cities and, something cringe like that. And then in the 60s, they introduced the good guy version of these giant creatures, called Kyodai, of which Ultraman was the first. And seeing as I liked big robots before this, and superheroes as well, naturally, big superheroes would appeal to me. This shit was my life for a while. I remember looking like a crazy person, telling all my friends and classmates about Ultraman and thinking that I'm crazy. Like, who's that? Never heard of this guy. I wasn't crazy, god damn it. As for the game itself, Ultraman Fighting Evolution was a 3D fighter where you either play as one of the Ultramen or the monsters they face in the shows. I remember the slam move Ultraman could do is when you jump on the enemy with your knees like this. I remember trying to mimic it in real life. Now, that was pretty easy when you were a small child, but now, as an overweight adult, yeah, nah. It was a fun game, but it wasn't that deep, despite being 3D. But let's be real, I'm not here for the fighting mechanics. I'm here to watch goofy Japanese men in latex outfits hit each other. The environment tried to do their best to sell to the player that these guys are in fact giant, but, the PlayStation 1 could only do so much. Now, the PS2 version, simply titled Ultraman, was something else. Out of every fighting game that I'm going to list in this video, this one was the most focused on single-player content. Easily the best-looking fighting game on the PlayStation 2, in my opinion. It was more concerned with being as authentic as possible to the original 60s TV show. The game goes to great lengths to immerse the player as Ultraman. The overall speed of movement is slower, all the attacks have weight, you feel the impact of every single attack each character does. A lot of the moves that they do are also very faithful to the 60s show. This game is truly a love letter to fans. Complete with goofy-ass flying airplane sounds. It's also hard as hell. Ultraman can't fight for a very long time. You have less than 3 minutes per fight, because as you take damage, your time lessens. In the lore, Ultraman can only stay in Ultra form for about 3 minutes or less, because of pollution or something made up like that. When you take enough damage, his health indicator will go red, and at that point, you only have 40 seconds or less before the fight is over. The way you dealt damage was unique as well. You had to stack up this red damage on the enemy's health bar. It would always stack up as long as you kept attacking, but all that accumulated damage will go away unless you end your combo with a cinematic ending move like a drop kick or an overhead throw or one of his projectile moves. This was a great game, and if there was one game from the PS2 era that I would love to have a remaster or remake, it would be this game. This exposed me to Ultraman media like the original TV show and movies. And speaking of movies...
Alright Guardians, don't forget this might be dangerous, so let's put on our mean faces.
Dude, put that thing away. Now, I don't want to tell you again. Oh, got some acorns on you, kid.
Ever since you got a little sap, you're a total D-hole. Now keep it up, and I'm gonna smash it!
Remember when Avengers Infinity War came out? All the normies were talking about how this was the greatest crossover Marvel has ever done? Motherfucker, Marvel already did that in the 90s.
Marvel vs. Capcom! Marvel vs. Capcom!
Now, if you were a dumb child like me, you're probably wondering, what on earth does that title even mean? I had no clue what Marvel really was. I assumed all superheroes were in the same universe. You know, Superman, Batman, Hellboy. You can blame birthday parties at McDonald's for that. And the other one, what the hell is a Capcom? Anyway, Capcom is a Japanese game company who makes a bunch of good fighting games, and I guess a bunch of other good regular games as well. This game was made by Capcom, thus making it my first Capcom game. I only really gave it a try because the box art looked cool, and the fact that I saw my boy Cyclops in the cover. Alright, it's gamer time. Despite the fact that I played that X-Men game earlier, it was this game that introduced me to comic book media as a whole, or at least made me more interested in it. It's a tag team 2D fighter. You swap between two characters that you pick and try to combo their attacks to beat the opponent. The game also has an assist character feature where you call upon a third character to help with special attacks. The one thing that this game excels at is its art and presentation. They can make so much work with so little. Pixel graphics is an art in of itself. Each character has super moves. Sure, previous games that I've covered also had super moves, but they all pale in comparison to this. The art, the presentation, the gameplay, it all still holds up. It's amazing. This was actually the first fighting game that I would boot up just to listen to the soundtrack. And speaking of art, these tracks are iconic and I still listen to them today. There weren't a ton of characters, and the characters I did play were mostly on Marvel side, with the exception of Mega Man because, you know, projectile spam. If I had to find a negative with this game, I guess I could say that the roster was a bit small. I didn't find any of the Capcom characters cool enough to try, other than Jin, but that's because I was confusing him with another Jin that I'll get into later. But this is fine when I saw that he had a big robot. I guess you could chalk it up to the fact that I wasn't familiar with Capcom yet at the time. However, this game commits a cardinal sin. My boy Cyclops wasn't actually a playable character. He was one of those assist characters. You press a button and he comes in to stare at the enemy for a little bit. This was egregious. How dare they put him on the box art and not actually make him a playable character? Now this is a real travesty. At the very least, it was remedied in the sequel.
Ready?
Marvel vs. Capcom 2. New Age of Heroes.
Marvel vs. Capcom 2. All of my complaints in the first game, all gone. Small roster pool? Try the biggest one in fighting game history, probably. Uncool Capcom characters? Not anymore. And finally, my boy is in the game in his full glory. This game goes from a tag team game to a tag team game. You pick 3 characters. You go from seeing 2 awesome super combo moves to 3. This game also awoke something in me with leotards. It makes me act up. I remember not liking the soundtrack when I first played it, thinking like, why is it jazz? Why is it so slow? This isn't a fighting game soundtrack. But that was me as a child. Now, I'm a man-child, and I possess greater amount of brain folds, allowing me to truly appreciate the beauty of this jazz opus of an official soundtrack. In fact, a good OST is absolutely a necessity for any fighting game worth its salt, just like good ambiance is needed for good horror games.
Good lord, this game is just absolute.
Oh no!
Of every horror game I have ever played, none of them have genuinely startled me until now.
A good fighting game needs good fight music. And like I mentioned before, one of the reasons I booted up the Marvel vs. Capcom games was for their music. The Gundam game also had very good music as well, and in most of their games, Street Fighter and Tekken never miss. specifically with Capcom, being that they make both Street Fighter and Marvel vs. Capcom. Capcom is particularly good at this, so props to them. It was this franchise that exposed the younger me to Marvel and comics as a whole. It's the whole reason that I bothered looking up wiki pages for all my different comic book characters. There were so many Marvel characters I didn't even know about. Like, for example, who's this Thanos nerd, huh?
Oh!
And now time for a lightning round part 2. To ensure maximum audience retention, I'm gonna place Family Guy and Subway Surfer footage on the sides of this video. If you're a functioning adult, these will be a non-issue. But if these things prove to be problematic and distracting, well, I got bad news for you. Mushiking! I played this exclusively in arcades, mostly in the late 2000s. It's a mix of a fighting game and a trading card game. I had stacks of these cards and each card was like 50 cents each. The whole deck was probably worth 150 bucks, which might not sound a lot, but I know for a fact that there are some Magic the Gathering players out there who've spent like 7 months worth of rent for their fucking cards. So, funnily enough, this game is about beetles fighting each other. It's a lot more interesting than it seems. You go there, you pay, and it dispenses a random card. All the cards have these barcodes on them, and then you can swipe them on the machine. That way you can use that specific beetle in the game. The game used a rock, paper, scissors system for its combat. It was this game that made me into a beetle nerd. I would go into the backyard and actually hunt for beetles when I was a kid. Fun fact, the Hercules beetle is the strongest animal for its size. And there's more species of beetle than any other creature in the world.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Soul Calibur 3, a 3D weapon-based fighting game on the PlayStation 2. It was like a better version of Battle Arena Toshinden. It was one of the later games on the system, and thus it was definitely up there in terms of being a looker. It also had a mechanic of knocking your opponent out of the arena. It had the best customization of any fighting game up to this point, and in fact, even the later games in the franchise would continue to improve upon this. This was also the game that I spent a lot of time honing my drawing skills. I'm not saying that I'm good. I remember spending hours in the gallery screen just trying to recreate the super detailed art. It had a game mode where you could make your own character, with a super detailed appearance editor, and your character's fighting style would be based on what weapon you wanted to use. But among the regular characters, I always played Siegfried, the short king himself. See, I told you there was a pattern here. Around the turn of the decade, maybe 2010, 2011-ish, I got myself a PlayStation Portable, and I didn't actually play that many fighting games on it, barring 3 examples. But for now, I'll just cover the odd one out. Naruto Ultimate Ninja Heroes. I'll be quick, I don't watch a lot of anime, but Naruto is one of the few that I do watch. I main Kakashi, he's the best character and it's not even a competition, both in the game and in the show. Most of the other playable characters are the Konoha 13, in other words, future NPCs as they become irrelevant in Shippuden. Though you could argue they were already kinda irrelevant here. 10-10. I like the fact that the game used the substitution jutsu a lot, unlike in the show, where it stopped mattering the moment it was introduced. I continued watching Naruto even after this game, and while I wouldn't call myself a massive anime fan, I definitely wouldn't have watched the anime that I did if it wasn't for Naruto, and by extension, this game. After this though, I kinda dropped off in terms of fighting games. The last console I owned was the Wii, and I only really placed Wii Sports on here as kind of a joke. Haha, got him, but is it actually a fighting game? I don't know, I had fun with it. This one time when I made my cousin play it, she accidentally punched her sister in the face in real life. That was pretty funny. But even though I would have wanted to play more fighting games, there were 2 things that made me stop. Or lessen, I guess. Number 1, the Wii wasn't exactly the best console for fighting games. And the bigger thing that stopped me from playing them is the fact that my family finally got a gaming PC. It was around this time that I really started to get into PC gaming, and I finally got my hands on MechWarrior. And many other games, of course. With one exception, most of the fighting games I did around this time were done through my friends' consoles. We'd frequently play Injustice 1, I played Shazam a lot, it was cool, on my buddy's laptop that he would bring to school. A few years later, we'd play Injustice 2, I settled for Superman because he gave Shazam laser eye surgery, and EA Sports UFC on my friend's PlayStation 4, which was brand new at the time. But by then, I had already sold my soul to Gaben, happily.
This reminds me of the Steam Summer Sale.
And PC has been my gaming platform of choice for a good number of years by this point. Fighting games would have been a fond but distant memory to me, a long faded flame that I would have happily looked back on. But there was one game franchise that kept that fire going. A constant. in all those years that I never stopped playing. There is one more series I've been holding off talking about till the end, as it has had the greatest influence on me as far as fighting games go, and that is Tekken. Tekken is a series that needs no introduction. It's Japanese for Iron Fist. Tekken is one of the big three in the fighting game genre, and it's mainly responsible for pioneering the 3D subgenre of fighting games. It wasn't the first 3D fighting game, but it was the one that popularized it. Tekken is actually the first game on the PlayStation 1 to sell over 1 million copies. And it was the third game, Tekken 3, that was considered the apex of 5th generation gaming. Not just fighting games, but gaming as a whole, rubbing shoulders with greats like Half-Life, StarCraft, Final Fantasy VII. Something that I loved about it was the fact that, for the most part, barring devils, robots fighting kangaroos, and typical anime-isms, the game was centered around various fighting styles competing with one another. The age-old debate between dumb elementary playground kids like, who would win, a karate guy or a kung fu guy? It was grounded. Well, more grounded compared to other Japanese fighting games. Well, I guess there's Virtua Fighter, but they don't count. Unless the character is specifically designed to be some fantasy fighting game bullshit. Most of the characters in Tekken are just humans who are really good at a specific fighting style. No projectile spam here. Tekken 7. Oh, who am I kidding? This franchise is not grounded whatsoever. Another thing that I liked about Tekken as a whole is the fact that the game never needed more than 8 buttons to play. All the way from Tekken 1 to Tekken 8, 8 buttons is all you need to play this game. It even makes it more impressive given that Tekken is known for its insane number of moves each character can do. That's bang for your buttons right there. Tekken 3 was my introduction to the franchise back on the PlayStation 1. And out of all the fighting games on the system, this is the one I played the most. Tekken 3, in my opinion, was the best looking PlayStation 1 game. In fact, most Tekken games are visual treats on the platform that they came out on, not you Tekken 7. My first main was Jin. I remember practicing his 10-hit combos a lot. It was hard for a kid to do. Come on man, look at this shit. I loved the unique hit effects that every character had. Lightning, fire, dragons made of fire, claws, fireworks. Tekken 3 is also the first game on the PlayStation 1 that I can 100% claim that I unlocked everything for. I unlocked all the characters, I finished all of their story modes, everything. It also had a ton of extra game modes. I loved playing Tekken Force and Tekken Ball. In my opinion, it is the crown jewel of PlayStation 1 games. Now, moving on to the next generation, despite the fact that there were 3 Tekken games on the PlayStation 2, I only played one of them, and that was Tekken Tag Tournament. It was the first time the Tekken games had a serious spin-off game. It was also one of the launch titles for the PlayStation 2. It's an amazing glow-up compared to Tekken 3. The tag games as a whole are just love letters to fans, as both games, Tekken Tag 1 and 2, I didn't really play 2 that much, have every character at the time playable in the tag games. Gone but not forgotten. In short, Tekken Tag has a tag mechanic. Wow, who'd have guessed? You pick 2 characters you can tag in and out of during the fight, allowing both the fights and combos to be longer. Also opens up a ton of new combo routes. I remember I would ask kids from the neighborhood that I would grow up in to come over to our house and just play this game. It was the Tekken party game, complete with bowling. I skipped Tekken 4 because I have a good reason. I didn't own it. Tekken 5 Dark Resurrection. Now, Tekken 5 was on the PlayStation 2, but I didn't own it. However, they released an updated version for the PSP called Dark Resurrection. Touching briefly on the PSP, I had fond memories of bringing this thing to school, using the wireless LAN to 1v1 friends. Being the edgy Linkin Park listening preteen I was at the time, I played Devil Jin. In fact, I got him to the highest rank in the game. Tekken 5 was definitely the most polished game up to this point. Every character had an in-game cutscene whenever they fight their mini-boss, along with the usual CG ending cutscene. It was also the first Tekken game to add cosmetics, a great feature at the time, dire consequences for the future. Tekken 5 was the new standard for Tekken games moving forward. Tekken 4 was very polarizing and people wanted a return to form, and thus Tekken 5 is a lot closer to Tekken 3. Tekken 5 was so momentous, the character designs and costumes more or less didn't change for another 10 years. Before I moved on to the next game, I decided to give this goofy new guy, Dragunov, a try. Dark Resurrection was his debut game. He seemed fun. I might play him some more in the future. Now, Tekken 6. This is the one, the foundation, the rock, the MVP, one might say. Because this game was part of me, literally, kinda. I've played it on 3 different platforms, the PSP, the arcade, and on my phone, via an emulator. This was a game that kept me from completely dropping fighting games. I played this game in and out. There were times after school, me and my friends would go to the arcade, and with 1 coin, I was set for the next hour, as that's all I needed. Random people would line up on the machine opposite me, and I'd get the message, "Here comes our new challenger." And not to suck my own dick or anything, but they didn't win. That's actually one thing I'm gonna miss about fighting games in the future. Online matches are great, but the joy of physically seeing your opponent and then beating the shit out of them in-game, it's a rush that I fear most people now can't really replicate anymore. This was also the game that I fully became a Dragunov main. Stop nerfing him in Tekken 8. And throughout a decade of graduating high school, going to college, and literally crossing the world, Tekken 6, funnily enough, was the game that, in one way or another, was always with me. Whether I was going to school, waiting in a room, traveling, or just bored, Tekken 6 was always in my pocket. I can't give an exact number, but I played this game more and for longer than any other fighting game. Maybe until Tekken 8 beats that. Tekken 6 was truly fundamental to me. I owe a lot to Tekken 6. All of my love for fighting games came primarily from this game. And while it definitely did that job of keeping the fighting game spark going, I needed something more. I needed something a little extra to really reignite that fighting game flame. And then, later, probably sometime in 2020, 2021-ish, there was a Steam sale for Tekken 7. The game had already been out for a good number of years by this point, so I thought to myself, I already knew everything about Tekken 6, so why wouldn't I be good at Tekken 7? Now, Tekken 7 is my first attempt at online fighting game matches. I know, right? All this time playing fighting games and it took 20 years just to play online. And holy shit, was it a trial by fire. Everyone I faced was already playing Tekken 7 for years at this point, and that's on top of me having to learn the new game mechanics. This is also when Tekken's most iconic character was revealed here, Negan from Street Fighter.
Pissing our pants yet?
Tekken 7 is also the first time I actually started looking up online guides for a fighting game. Blasted Salami, Main Man Sui, Massive Zug, TDX, Peter Wymau, sorry if I mispronounced those last two. All of these guys made me learn things that simply playing in practice mode never could. And while Tekken 7 was new to me, it wasn't new to its dedicated player base, who by that point, some of them have been playing the game since 2015. Let's be honest, even on release, Tekken 7 wasn't the most graphically impressive game at the time, notably being the only Tekken game that wasn't really pushing the hardware to its limits. The player base wanted something new, something fresh, something... Tekken 8 is special. It's the only fighting game that I actually waited for. It was my first time being able to play a fighting game on release. It's also one of the few games that I've ever pre-ordered, something I almost never do. I've only pre-ordered 3 games in my life, Cyberpunk, Elden Ring, and Tekken 8. The game is still new and fresh, and while I'm not pleased with the microtransactions they've added after the fact, also, some fans aren't too happy about the heat system or the greater emphasis on aggression in the game. But to me, the game is, in of itself, one of the best modern-day fighting games. Because of Tekken 8, I've made an entire new subgroup of friends who just specifically play Tekken. Look at me, staying up way past my bedtime, playing in lobbies with up to 8 or more of my Tekken buddies. Good times. And that leads us up to now. I've been playing Tekken 8 almost religiously since launch, and this new passion for fighting games made me buy Street Fighter 6. I've never actually played a Street Fighter game now that I think about it. Marvel vs. Capcom don't count. Apologies in advance for any Street Fighter fans in the audience. I just haven't played the game enough to say a lot about it. I would play it more, but unfortunately, Tekken is just too damn hard to put down. I will say though, I like the visuals and the soundtrack of this game. You can tell I've been using their songs throughout this video. It's good. It's fire. Anyway, these games are still new to me, and I still got a lot of learning, winning, and most of all, losing to do. Fighting games are an amazing genre. They're fundamental to many things that I eventually took interest in. They're the reason I got invested into comic books and comic-related media. It wasn't the shows, it wasn't the early movies, it was fighting games. It's also the reason that I'm interested about HEMA and other aspects of medieval weapons and warfare. It's also the reason I started watching Naruto and other anime, casually. They're the reason why I have a higher than normal knowledge about Beatles, I guess. And it was fighting games that taught me in order to get better at games, you have to put the time to learn, to better yourself at practicing. And I don't mean just in fighting games. If I lost a match in Dota, I would look back at the match and see what I could have done better. Fighting games taught me that years ago, not Dota. If I wanted to get better at playing TF2, I would have to learn the in and outs of my character, understand their limitations and strengths. This goes back to fighting games again, like when I learned that a ranged zoner is best at keeping opponents away from you. Cyclops. Getting my ass handed to me by a boss in Dark Souls? I would learn how to use other weapons or focus on more movement and blocking rather than attacking. Again, roots back to the practice mode in X-Men Academy, Marvel vs. Capcom, or Tekken. Fighting games are in a lot better spot than they've ever been. They're more accessible than ever, and that's not even mentioning the modern quality of life features they have now, like network rollback, instant rematches, various replay features, accessibility, and with more fighting games coming out soon like Fatal Fury and 2XKO. It's a dumbass name. The genre itself might be quite niche now, but back in the day it used to be one of the pillars of gaming. For reference, here's the #1 fighting game back in the PS1 era versus the #1 FPS at the time. Apologies if I lost track of my original purpose of the video, asking if I was a fighting game player at all, when the answer was always apparent. I guess it was just an excuse for me to reminisce on the games of my past, enjoy the games of the present, and be excited for the games to come. I'm happy to keep playing fighting games. They have become a staple of my gaming diet once again. And after all, a healthy diet needs a good amount of sugar coating. Thanks for watching. Do the YouTube things.